Hey, welcome to Dan's Model Works, and it's part two of building a Sea Harrier by Tamiya, and this is the original release of the Sea Harrier. It's probably a repop. It's probably a more recent boxing of it, but this is the basic original Sea Harrier as it first appeared and was kitted by Tamiya. So we've got our basic engine done. We get a dude for the cockpit. The cockpit itself is not terribly detailed, which is one of the reasons I've decided to go with the pilot figure. One of the first things I want to get sorted out is my louvers. And as you can see, I've got them together. And as I built them, I took the precaution of labeling them. So this one is RR for right rear. And the way Tamiya puts them together is one of their big failings of this kit, so far as I'm concerned, is you end up with this huge, nasty seam in the middle of all the louvers. Now you can see that I've started putting putty on these things, but I think I'm going to take one of them and then I'm going to hog everything out. And then I'm going to install some much finer pieces of plastic and see if that improves the appearance of these. Because I'm just not happy with the way these are looking. Alright, sorry I didn't film all of that. It would have required me standing and basically hovering the Dremel and the part in front of the camera, and I just needed to brace it up against something, so I did the rest of it off camera. But I'm going to clean this up with an X-Acto knife and some files. As you can see, I basically hollowed it out all the way down to the base plate because we need this. Alright, this one obviously is been hollowed out and cleaned out. This one, of course, is the before. This was arguably the easy part, I think. The hard part is going to be to slot two pieces of plastic in to replicate the veins as they probably should be. That's it, smash into the camera. So let's see how that goes. That's our first vein glued in place. Now I'm not trying to replicate the curved bits deeper down, because you know what, you couldn't see that in the original part anyway. So that's just some very thin styrene. I'm not sure what thickness it is. Maybe, I don't think it's 10th out. I think it's one up from that. All I did was I cut a strip, and I cut a smaller piece off of it, and then I nibbled away at it. And that was glued in there using Tamiya liquid model cement, because it tends to be a little gooey. And I was hoping that I could, tend to fill any gaps on the sides. We'll get the next piece in and see how it looks overall. And there is our second vein in place. And looking at it straight on, I think I've got a slight bit more space in here than I do in the upper area. But it certainly, I think, looks a whole lot better than the original. The original was like probably 85% blocked, and the material that the veins were cast in was way, way too thick. We'll just bring its buddy up here for comparison. So as nerve-wracking as that is to make, I think it's worth doing to the other three. Probably before I work on the next one, I'm just going to give this some gray primer just overall to see how it looks. So the one on the left is largely unmodified now. I have put some putty on, but I haven't done a lot of trying to shave down of those louvers. The one on the right has louvers that are made out of, I think, 10,000 styrene. Just even trying to get a file or a knife in there to clean these up is almost impossible. So you can see what the one with the homemade louvers looks like after I've given it some primer. So I think I'm probably going to end up biting the bullet and doing the rest of them. Here we have the rear louvers. And of course, this one I haven't ripped out the middle parts and replaced them yet. This one has been done. Not quite as solid as the front ones, but still I think it looks better when you replace the vanes with sheet plastic. So I'm going to be dremeling the inside of this one out very soon. Here's the second rear nozzle after I've milled it out using a Dremel tool. I'm going to clean it up with number 11 X-Acto blade and some round files and that before I start trying to put the new vanes in. And there is all 4 of our engine exhausts primed. And they're not perfect, but they look a whole lot better than they did before. In terms of actual time working on them, it's not been that long. But this is literally 3 weeks after I started working on them. Just been having trouble finding time to sit down at the hobby bench. As a matter of fact, I thought this episode was going to be up probably a week and a half ago. And I thought I'd probably have another episode of the Volkswagen Rabbit up. But what I'm currently dealing with is grocery getting. I work full-time at one grocery store and part-time at another. And I'm certainly not complaining about not being off work because there are so many people worldwide who can't work. But what many people in the food industry are finding is that they're working 2 or 3 extra hours a day, just struggling to get the shelves full again and the stores back in shape, in response to the virus which shall not be named or else you'll be demonetized. So when you come home after working like crazy and working for an extra hour and a half or whatever and everything hurts, sometimes you just kind of crash instead of doing what you want to do. So let's press on. I'm making preparations to bring the fuselage halves together. And of course the engine basically fits onto these pegs here like so. And one thing I've noticed that this is the front landing gear bay, and there's really not a roof or anything to it. Now, I understand, I could be wrong, that when the landing gear bay is open, it serves as another source of intake air. That I get. But really the only roof there is this little shelf right here. So what I've done is I've just extended it a little bit here. And I'm just going to put a couple of small boxes and, make it up as you go along, detailing in there just to make things a little bit more interesting. And it's not going to block our view of the engine. See? You can still look up inside there and see the engine through the landing gear bay. I just think it'll probably make it look a little bit better. Here's that same panel. And I've just given it a coat of neutral gray. I don't know what the interior primer color of a Harrier should be. Neutral gray is usually a neutral choice. You can see I've added a tank in there, a couple of boxes and things like that. That's just to liven up this area, and I kept most of them to the front. so that way there's space for the wheel to go in. I've got the engine glued in place here, and I've also painted the inside of the fuselage. I don't know what the correct color is. I'm pretty sure it shouldn't be zinc chromate, but I ended up using a greenish color anyway, as you can tell. Here's the other side. Now, if you're going to be building this, and you're going to have this hatch so it can be opened, I strongly suggest that you basically paint everything on the inside, because it's surprising how much you can see around that engine. So that's what I ended up doing, is I ended up 3 times thinking I had everything all painted, and then I would test fit it together, and I'd be like, oh, geez, I can see here, I can see there. So you may as well paint everything. Now, before I seal up the fuselage halves, here's another look at that panel that I installed in there. And like I said, I just put a couple of shapes in there just to space it up a little bit. I have not actually blocked off the landing gear bay from the air inlet. I just put a few things in there to make it a little bit more interesting. I've got the fuselage halves together, and there's not really any gaps, but there are a few ridges. Right here is particularly bad, but at least it's a very flat, broad surface, so I should be able to file across there. There's a bit of a line along here. The underside, there's a little bit of a line, but it doesn't look like I'm going to have any huge gaps to fill. Probably just a couple small spots. We'll know better after I do some sanding. Unfortunately, that's the problem with raised panel lines, is you're going to lose a lot of them when you sand, whereas at least a recessed panel line, you can always restore it. If you're building this kit and you're panicking about the alignment of this inner air inlet in comparison to this, and thinking it doesn't fit very well, by the time you get the front of the air inlet here, it basically hides all sins. You can see that it actually blends in quite well. All it does is really just overlap, as the camera's trying to focus on the last thing I want you to see. So I'm just getting these air inlets on now while I'm waiting for my fuselage seams to set before I start sanding. They do fit pretty good, or at least this side does. We'll see about the other side. You can see that not really going to need to do any sanding or anything drastic here. There's a head-on view of our air intakes on. I think they look pretty good. Maybe a little bit of sanding right about there, but nothing too tragic. So I'm in the middle of doing my seam work here, cleaning everything up. Haven't seen any huge dents or anything yet. This area did have a prominent ridge, but it's coming clean. If we look at the base of the tail, British jets oftentimes will have an inlet back here at the base of the tail. And this certainly appears to be the case. Did a little bit of hunting online, and I found a couple of pictures that show that this should be open. So I'm going to be using a combination of X-Acto knife blades and files to open up this. A few minutes work with the number 11 X-Acto blade hollowed out the air intake at the base of the tail, and the only area I've used any putty so far is just right here on the belly, and it's not nearly as drastic as that looks. By the time I sand it down, there'll be almost nothing there. I glued the wings on off camera. They went on without any huge difficulties and had a pretty good fit. Okay, there's our belly sanded down, and that looks pretty good. I also just gave this a touch of filler right here. I'm not even sure if we're going to see this. I think there's a part that goes on top of that. Anyway, the rearmost puffer jet, that seemed to have come out nice and rectangular. Same thing as the front. The next thing to worry about fit-wise is the engine hatch cover right here. Now, I seem to recall this giving me a lot of trouble fit-wise many years ago. So as I just pop it in place, it actually looks, in terms of overall dimensions, it looks pretty good. But it seems to be sitting a little deep right here. So I'm just going to put a little bit of a styrene tab on the mount underneath. There we go. I'll put a little tab right there. So I've put those shims in I was talking about, and it seems pretty flush now. Actually, to get this panel out, you almost have to take a knife blade and flick. But you can see the white of the two plastic shims that I put in there versus the stock tabs. So far there hasn't been any huge problems with assembly on this. Let's hope that continues. I'm installing the scoops behind the cockpit here. These parts are the same. They're basically the kit part. This one has been glued down, and before I glued it down, I filed it from the underside, so it in fact was a scoop. You can see this one is not hollow at all, so this one still needs to be filed, and hopefully I won't be dropping it on the floor. Okay, we've got them both installed and hollowed out, and I think it looks pretty good. And I did add one more little piece of styrene underneath our hatch. I'm probably going to be putting just a very piece of 10,000 styrene right here and here, just to take up a little bit of this gap on our hatch. Well, I think it's starting to look like a plane, although a rather lumpy plane. I have the pods on for the 8-in cannons, and I've got them as symmetrical as I can, because there's not actually any spots that they give you to glue them in. Like, it isn't like a drill these holes if you're using the gun pods. I've got the weapon stations on, and I still might fuss with the hatch a little bit more, but it's getting close to where I want it to be. So I think I'm going to leave off for this particular episode and wrap things up. And I'm hoping that everybody stays safe, and hopefully everyone stays healthy. And if you do catch the virus which shall not be named, that you make a quick, speedy recovery. This is something that virtually, I'd say, probably 90% of the world is going through right now. It's not one of these things where you can say, oh, it's this country has it and this other country isn't affected. I think almost every country has had some cases and is having to make some tough decisions. So, if you do find yourself at home trying to keep yourself busy, build a model. So, thanks for watching, and as I said, just keep on modeling.